On death row, every second has a destination, every sound has meaning, every footstep carries weight, and every inmate knows that one day, someone will walk through that door and call their name. For Tony Carruthers, that day finally arrived. After nearly 30 years behind bars, after decades of appeals, after countless court battles, the state of Tennessee was prepared to end his life. The execution chamber had been prepared, witnesses had gathered, officials stood ready. The clock was moving toward its final moment. Then something happened, something no one expected. Not a new witness, not a shocking confession, not DNA evidence, not a judge stepping in at the last second. Instead, the execution stopped because officials could not find a vein. 3 decades after one of Tennessee's most disturbing murder cases, questions surrounding Tony Carruthers refused to disappear. Questions about guilt, questions about evidence, questions about justice itself. And now, the execution that was supposed to close the case may have opened an entirely new chapter. Tonight, we enter the shadows surrounding a crime that still divides opinion, and a man who came within moments of death. This is Shadow Case Files. To understand why people across America suddenly focused on Tony Carruthers, you have to go back to Memphis, Tennessee, February 1994. 3 people vanished. 21-year-old Marcellos Anderson, his mother, Delois Anderson, and 17-year-old Frederick Tucker. At first, there were questions. Where had they gone? Why had they disappeared? Were they hiding? Had they left voluntarily? Days passed, then weeks, and investigators received information that led them toward a place few expected, Rose Hill Cemetery. A place meant for mourning, a place meant for remembrance, a place meant for the dead. But investigators weren't searching for old graves. They were searching for something new, something hidden, something buried beneath the earth itself. And when investigators began digging, they uncovered a scene that horrified even seasoned detectives. Beneath a freshly prepared grave lay 3 bodies, 3 victims, hidden beneath another burial site, concealed in a way prosecutors later described as calculated and deliberate. But according to later testimony, the horror didn't stop there. Medical findings would suggest a possibility so disturbing that it still echoes through the case today. At least some victims may still have been alive when they were buried. For Memphis, the discovery sent shockwaves across the city, and investigators immediately began searching for whoever was responsible. As investigators pieced together the timeline, their attention eventually focused on Tony Carruthers. Prosecutors argued the motive was simple: money. According to court records, Marcellos Anderson reportedly carried significant amounts of cash and jewelry. Prosecutors believed he had become the target of a robbery plot. Authorities later alleged the victims had been kidnapped, driven into Mississippi, attacked, and eventually returned to Memphis for burial. As the investigation continued, witnesses began coming forward. Informants spoke with authorities. Statements were collected, and prosecutors said a picture was beginning to emerge. But there was a problem, a very important problem. There was no DNA evidence directly linking Carruthers to the murders. No fingerprint evidence placing him at the scene. No eyewitness testimony directly placed him at the killings. Instead, the case depended heavily on testimony, circumstantial evidence, and statements from jailhouse informants. One inmate claimed Carruthers confessed to details of the murders while incarcerated. Prosecutors also introduced letters they argued contained references to violence and to what they described as a master plan. The state argued the evidence showed calculation, planning, intent, and extraordinary cruelty. But supporters of Carruthers would later ask a different question. What happens when a person's life depends mostly on witnesses instead of physical evidence? Then the trial took an unusual turn, because Tony Carruthers represented himself. Imagine sitting in a courtroom, facing the possibility of execution, while standing alone against prosecutors, investigators, and the entire machinery of the state. Court records later showed multiple attorneys had withdrawn. Appeals would later ask questions surrounding Carruthers' mental state. Supporters argued a defendant facing death should never have been permitted to represent himself in a case this complex. Critics argued something else. They said his behavior inside the courtroom damaged his own defense. The jurors saw someone combative, difficult, unpredictable, and in court, perception matters. Because juries don't just hear evidence, they watch people, they read expressions, they notice reactions, and sometimes those impressions become impossible to separate from facts. But decades later, new voices would enter the story. Civil rights groups, celebrity advocates, questions about DNA evidence, questions about mental illness, and eventually, a scheduled execution that would stop in a way almost nobody could have predicted. Because on the day Tennessee prepared to carry out its sentence, something unexpected happened inside the execution chamber. And what happened next placed Tony Carruthers back into the national spotlight. Years passed, then years became decades. Most death row cases slowly disappear from public attention. Appeals are filed, arguments are rejected. And eventually, the world moves on. But Tony Carruthers' case never completely faded away. Because while courts repeatedly upheld his convictions, supporters kept asking the same question: where was the physical evidence? Carruthers himself repeatedly insisted there wasn't any. No DNA, no fingerprints, no direct eyewitness placed him at the murders, and over time, those arguments began attracting attention beyond Tennessee. Civil rights advocates, legal organizations, and innocence advocates started looking more closely. Among the loudest voices was the American Civil Liberties Union. The ACLU argued that serious questions surrounding the conviction had never been fully addressed. According to supporters, the evidence collected during the original investigation had never received modern forensic testing. Fingerprints allegedly remained insufficiently analyzed. Potential DNA evidence, they argued, had never been fully explored using today's technology. And for advocates, that raised a troubling possibility. What if evidence capable of identifying someone else had been sitting untouched for decades? What if science had advanced faster than the legal system? Because in modern criminal investigations, DNA has changed everything. Cases once considered solved have been overturned. Wrongful convictions have been exposed. Cold cases have been reopened. And people once thought guilty beyond doubt have walked free. Supporters argued that Carruthers deserved the same opportunity. But prosecutors saw things differently. For them, the verdict had already survived decades of scrutiny. Appeals had been reviewed. Judges had ruled repeatedly. The conviction stood. The sentence stood. The case, they argued, had already been decided. Yet outside courtrooms, public interest was beginning to grow. And then, someone unexpected entered the story. Someone with millions of followers. Someone capable of pulling a decades-old case into headlines overnight. In recent years, criminal justice reform has gained powerful new voices. And one of those voices suddenly turned toward Tony Carruthers. Reality television star and criminal justice advocate Kim Kardashian publicly called attention to the case. She urged supporters to contact Tennessee officials. She questioned whether DNA testing had been sufficiently explored. And suddenly, a case many people had never heard of was everywhere. News outlets covered it. Social media exploded with debate. Supporters demanded more testing. Critics pushed back. Some argued that celebrity involvement could create emotional pressure around complex criminal cases. Others argued something different. They said attention itself wasn't the problem. Ignoring unanswered questions was. Meanwhile, supporters gathered signatures. Thousands became tens of thousands. Then tens of thousands became more than 100,000. Petitions flooded state offices. Activists organized demonstrations. Community groups rallied. Their message was simple: test the evidence. Answer the questions before it is too late. But time was disappearing, because while public debate intensified, the execution date remained on the calendar. And another issue was emerging, one that involved Carruthers himself, because his attorneys weren't only arguing innocence, they were arguing about something else, something deeply troubling: mental competency. Court filings described severe mental health conditions, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar symptoms, brain damage. Attorneys argued that his mental state had deteriorated to a point where he no longer rationally understood what was happening. They described ongoing delusions, confusion, a distorted understanding of reality. And legally, that question matters. Because the justice system has long debated whether someone who cannot rationally understand their punishment should be executed. Supporters argued the state was preparing to execute a man whose mind had deteriorated. But courts continued moving forward. The execution date remained, and eventually, the day arrived. For nearly 30 years, Tony Carruthers had lived under a countdown. Appeal after appeal had failed. Petition after petition had been denied. Now, the final hours had arrived. Inside Tennessee's execution facility, officials prepared according to protocol. Witnesses assembled. Procedures began. The process moved forward. For Tony Carruthers, this appeared to be the end. Then suddenly, everything changed. Not because of new evidence, not because of a judge, not because of a confession. Because officials could not find a vein. The medical team reportedly established an initial IV line. But under execution protocol, a backup line was also required. And according to officials, they could not successfully establish it. Attempts continued. Procedures were followed. Then the effort failed. The execution was stopped just like that. After decades on death row, Tony Carruthers walked back out alive. For supporters, the moment felt extraordinary. Some viewed it as an intervention. Others saw it as evidence that unanswered questions remained. For prosecutors and victim supporters, it meant something else entirely. Another delay, another chapter in a case that had already stretched across decades. Soon afterward, Governor Bill Lee granted Carruthers a temporary one-year reprieve. The execution would not happen, at least not yet. But even after the headlines faded, the larger questions remained exactly where they had always been. Was Tony Carruthers wrongfully convicted? Could modern testing reveal something new? Did the justice system get this case right? Or after 30 years, are critical answers still buried somewhere beneath the evidence? Because the strange thing about shadows is that they don't disappear. They wait, and sometimes they grow. 3 people lost their lives. Families lost people they loved. A man still sits on death row, maintaining his innocence. And a case that many believed had reached its conclusion, it suddenly found itself back in darkness. So now we ask you, if modern DNA testing could answer lingering questions, should it happen? Or after decades of court decisions, has justice already spoken? Tell us what you believe in the comments below. And for more untold crimes, courtroom mysteries, and cases that continue dividing opinion years later, subscribe to Shadow Case Files. Because some secrets never stay buried. They wait, and eventually, they rise back to the surface. Every case leaves a shadow. Every mystery deserves a voice. This is Shadow Case Files.